On the night of December 11th, 2006, crime boss Marlo Hyland stayed at his niece's house in Scribbletown Park, Finglas. The paranoid criminal had access to several properties and never slept at the same place 2 nights in a row. Just before 9 a.m. the next morning, after his niece had left to take her daughter to school, tragedy struck as 2 gunmen entered the house. Hyland was asleep in an upstairs bedroom, while Anthony Campbell, a 20-year-old apprentice plumber, was fixing a malfunctioning radiator downstairs. Upon entering his house, one of the gunmen held Campbell, while the other silently went up the stairs and fatally shot Hyland in his bed. Shockingly, before fleeing the scene, the attackers also shot Campbell, a completely innocent party, causing anger in the community. Their intent was most likely to rule him out as a possible witness. In the period leading up to his murder, Marlo Hyland had emerged as one of the most notorious figures in the city's underworld. Hailing from a working-class background in Cabra, Dublin, he delved into a life of crime at a young age. Leading a group of delinquents from the northern suburbs, he dabbled in various illicit activities. In 1986, 18-year-old Hyland was sent to prison for multiple offences, ranging from conspiracy to commit robbery to burglary and car theft. Upon his release, Hyland became involved in the drug trade. He moved into the big league of crime when he became a protege of PJ, the psycho judge, a major criminal from Finglas. Under Judge's mentorship, Hyland learned the art of instilling fear as a means of asserting dominance, and after Judge's death, he followed in his footsteps. Judge was shot outside the Royal Oak pub in Finglas in December 1996. It's widely speculated that Hyland orchestrated the hit on his own boss, solidifying his position as a formidable force in the criminal underworld. Hyland quickly garnered a reputation for ruthlessness, imposing violent retribution for even minor transgressions, and killing those who challenged him in serious ways. He had links with various major criminal gangs in Dublin, and supplied guns to one of the factions involved in the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud and the notorious McCarthy-Dundon gang. Within a few years of Judge's death, Hyland rose to prominence and became the dominant figure in organised crime in North Dublin. He was responsible for a number of murders, or suspected of ordering them. Hyland controlled a large gang of drug dealers and armed robbers from Cabra and Ballymun. The gang were involved in the importation of large drug shipments, as well as VAT fraud, car theft, robbery, and the supply of firearms. In a 10-month period alone, between October 2003 to July 2004, they got away with an estimated €3 million, a pretty decent amount for the time. As their criminal operations expanded, Hyland and his associates inevitably found themselves in the crosshairs of law enforcement. Gardaí first set up an operation to crack down on gangland crime in general, and then realizing how big Hyland's network had become, set up a separate operation to dismantle his organization, codenamed Operation Oak. The operation was a huge success, and within the first few months, it had led to the seizure of huge amounts of heroin, cocaine, and cannabis. A number of stolen vehicles, cash, and weapons including AK-47s were also recovered. As a result, 26 of Hyland's associates were facing serious charges, which had led to resentment and paranoia building within the gang. As Garda pressure increased, Hyland became more isolated as gang members blamed him for all the attention. Throughout 2006, in the period leading up to his murder, Hyland started surrounding himself with serious criminals. The 2 most notable were Patrick Dutchy Holland, suspected of being the gunman who shot journalist Veronica Guerin, and Desi O'Hare, the notorious INLA terrorist convicted of the kidnapping and torture of Dublin dentist John O'Grady. Hyland supplied rest homes for these gangsters after they were released from prison, hoping to increase his standing in the criminal world. Although Hyland had always thought he was untouchable, the last months of his life he knew he was living on borrowed time. By the end of 2006, he was officially warned by Gardaí that his life was in danger. Meanwhile, 2 of his most trusted lieutenants, John Mangan from Blanchardstown and the Fingers criminal Willie Hines, were out on bail. At the onset of that year, Mangan was caught with nearly €400,000 worth of cannabis in Drumcondra. Just a few months later, in a bold move alongside his accomplice William Hines, he was implicated in another major drug bust. This time, involving a staggering €2 million worth of cannabis at Brown's Barn on the Naze Road. The resin stash, divided among 14 boxes, was uncovered by Gardaí, discreetly stowed within a Ford Transit van and an Opel Astra part of the car park. Despite the gravity of their offences, Mangan and Hines were permitted to await trial while at large. However, the repercussions of the drug busts were far-reaching and catastrophic. It led to huge paranoia within Hyland's gang, breeding suspicion among his own ranks that he was a tout to Gardaí. This internal discord ultimately culminated in Hyland's death at the close of 2006. Following the double homicide, a major Garda investigation was set up, during which a large number of Hyland's associates were tracked down and questioned. Gardaí soon suspected that Hyland was killed by lieutenants of his own gang. Within just a couple of months, the gunmen were identified as John Mangan and Willie Hines. However, they were never charged in relation to the double murder. Just 8 months after Hyland and Campbell were shot dead, Mangan was arrested with a loaded Luger pistol down his trousers in the Comet pub in Century. 2 years later, Mangan faced conviction on all charges during a dramatic trial in which the judge imposed a 14-year sentence on him and a 12-year sentence on Hines. Now, as Mangan approaches his release date, concerns loom about his behaviour behind bars. Renowned for his volatile nature, he has earned a reputation as one of the most dangerous inmates within the Irish prison system. Over time, many stories have spread about his unpredictable behaviour, especially his efforts to communicate with people linked to Marlo Hyland or his allies, often in confrontational ways. In 2021, just as he was about to be released after serving nearly 14 years, the 55-year-old made a foolish decision. He was transferred to Locken House, an open prison for convicts nearing the end of their sentences, but went on a run. After a few weeks, he was caught while driving recklessly on a high-powered motorbike, following a high-speed pursuit. As a result, he was returned to a high-security prison, where he received an additional sentence and lost the privileges of being in an open jail. Although Gardaí soon suspected that the killers were 2 of Hyland's most trusted lieutenants, no one has been convicted of the double murder. Following the murders, Eamon Dunne, another prominent criminal from Finglas, and one of Hyland's closest associates, took over control of the gang. Dunne and Hyland were clients of the Kinahan cartel, who at this point were based outside of Ireland. The day before Hyland's assassination, he and his associates were guests of honor at a boxing match hosted by the Kinahans. It is believed that Dunne betrayed his own associate and orchestrated his execution, even serving as the getaway driver for Hyland's killers. Over the next 3 years, Dunne was implicated in more than a dozen gangland murders before he met his own demise at a pub in Cabra in April 2010. At the time of his death, Dunne was out on bail and awaiting trial for his involvement in a €900,000 robbery of a cash-in-transit van in Selbridge. While there are suspicions that the Kinahans were behind Dunne's assassination, no one has been convicted in connection with the crime. On the night of April 23, 2010, the Fassig House pub in Cabra, Dublin, is packed with people. Laughter mingles with the clinking of glasses as a birthday celebration fills the air. But amidst the jovial atmosphere, darkness lurks outside. Around 10 p.m, a red VW Passat pulls up, from which several armed men with their faces and heads concealed emerge. One of them remains outside the door, while another gunman ventures into the pub to locate his target. Guided by a spotter inside, he approaches with chilling precision. Without hesitation, he shouts commands for everyone to take cover as he closes in on his mark. Moments later, gunfire erupts, shattering the once lively atmosphere of the pub. One of the people attending the birthday party was Eamon Dunne, a notorious criminal from Finglas. Dunne had emerged seemingly from nowhere to become one of the godfathers of Irish crime. How did the man who had no criminal record become Ireland's public enemy number 1? Born in 1974, he hailed from the working-class area of Cabra on Dublin's north side. He came from a respectable family, was smart, and worked hard, but instead of choosing a conventional path after leaving school in 1993, he turned to crime. In the 1990s, as the clubbing scene flourished, a wave of recreational drug use swept the country. Dunne seized the opportunity presented by this growing demand for substances like ecstasy, speed, and cocaine. As his business expanded, he formed a partnership with a notorious figure in Dublin's underworld, Marlo Hyland, who had been his friend for years. Their alliance was a blend of brains and brawn, Hyland providing strategic insight, while Dunne executed with unwavering determination. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, never shying away from any task, no matter how daunting, that came their way. Dunne first came to the attention of Gardaí in the late 90s, following a chilling discovery during a routine car stop: a man bound in the trunk of his car. Despite his arrest at the scene, Dunne managed to evade conviction due to the lack of evidence. However, Dunne was now firmly on the radar of the Garda, and from that point on, his trajectory skyrocketed, marked by a sharp escalation in violence. Dunne's connections extended beyond Marlo Hyland to include another notorious figure, Eamon Kelly. Kelly, whose criminal career began in his teens, had ties to the IRA and mingled with Ireland's most infamous underworld figures. He served as a mentor not only to Dunne and Hyland, but also to Jerry the Monk Hutch. In a landmark case in 1993, Kelly received the longest sentence yet for cocaine smuggling in Ireland: 14 years for trafficking a kilogram valued at €50,000, an unprecedented and horrendous sentence. By 2005, Dunne had risen to prominence as a senior figure in Dublin's criminal underworld. Prior to this, he had operated largely under the radar, unnoticed by the city's gangland circles. But within 2 years, he was standing shoulder to shoulder with the giants of the Irish underworld. Remarkably, he had managed to avoid implication in any gangland murders, yet this changed dramatically in August 2005 with the mysterious disappearance of convicted drug dealer Andrew Dillon in North County Dublin. His lifeless body was found dumped on farmland, and his last known contact was with Dunne. With all signs pointed towards Dunne as the shooter, the lack of forensic evidence made it difficult to establish concrete proof. So far, Hyland and Dunne's crimes had stayed within the confines of Dublin's gangland, but that changed with the murder of the Latvian mother of two, Vaiba Solite, at her home in Swords in November 2006. She was married to a Lebanese man who was in prison at the time for trying to kidnap their children. According to the police, Solite, who had nothing to do with organized crime, became a target of a group of imprisoned gangsters. It is believed Dunne employed the services of an assassin belonging to a notorious criminal family in Limerick, after his boss Hyland was asked to help organize the hit. However, again in this case, Dunne escaped the arms of law enforcement. By then, the dynamic started to shift within Hyland's organization. The murder of Solite had intensified the pressure on Hyland, leading the cocaine-sniffing crime boss to become increasingly paranoid. His behavior left fellow criminals questioning whether he might be cooperating with authorities. Dunne, and others working for Hyland, became concerned that Hyland intended to kill them as his behavior became increasingly erratic. Subsequently, in 2006, Hyland was murdered in his sleep. Tragically, an innocent plumber who happened to be present in the same house also fell victim to the violence. It is believed that Dunne, who was one of Hyland's closest associates, drove the getaway car for the killers. Dunne was always the apprentice godfather, and it was only a matter of time before he'd take his opportunity to bring down Hyland and finally take control of the Dublin drug scene. What followed was a consolidation of Dunne's power, and that meant an awful lot of youngsters who had done no more than owe a few euro for drugs fell victim to Dunne's gang. Dunne was linked to 17 gangland murders over the next 3 years. The killing spree continued in 2007 with the fatal shooting of 27-year-old John Daly, the fingerless criminal who had achieved national notoriety when he telephoned into RTE's liveline on a mobile phone from his cell in Portlaoise prison. As a result of that call, a nationwide search of prisons uncovered more than 2,000 phones and led to a big interruption in communications between leading criminals and their associates on the outside. Daly was shot dead the day after he was released from jail as a result of anger over this consequence. It is believed that Dunne teamed up with gangland killer Fat Freddie Thompson, who is now jailed for life, and Paddy Doyle to take out the infamous Lifeline caller. Dunne, who was the single biggest driving force responsible for making those years the bloodiest years for gangland crime in Ireland. His reputation struck fear into the hearts of fellow gangsters, not only due to the uncertainty of who his next target might be, but also because of the intense scrutiny he attracted from law enforcement. The escalating nature of his crime seemed to spiral out of control, drawing massive attention from the Gardaí. He appeared to have an insatiable appetite for both violence and sexual encounters. His penchant for becoming entangled with the women of notorious criminals only added to the perilous risks he faced. Aware of the constant threats looming over him, Dunne adopted extreme precautions. He wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone he perceived as a threat to his life. Always on guard, he made a habit of wearing a bulletproof vest and rotated between various residences every night to evade potential attackers. By 2010, Dunne's killing spree had brought too much attention on Ireland's crime bosses. Profits were down, and Dunne's behaviour was seen as both reckless and a threat to Dublin's drug trade. Dunne had become a liability, and it was inevitable that a contract would be taken out on his life. Like his mentor, Marlo Hyland, Dunne was expendable. On that fateful evening in April 2010, Dunne sat at the back of the pub and had just ordered a round of drinks. Typically vigilant, he usually positioned himself to face the door, but this time he faced the wall, a move that would prove to be the biggest mistake of his life. Just as Chinese national Zheng Xian, who worked part-time in the pub, came over to Dunne's table to deliver the drinks, a gunman entered the pub. While Xian stood waiting for the payment for the 7-Up Dunne ordered, the killer fired 2 bullets which hit Dunne. Dunne then struggled to his feet and grabbed hold of the bar boy, using him as a human shield. However, the boy got pushed to the side, and the gunman fired 10 more shots. Dunne was hit with 8 of them, before the eyes of his 16-year-old daughter. Dunne's life ended abruptly at the scene, the entire ordeal unfolding in a mere 30 seconds. Although it is widely believed that Dunne's murder was ordered by Eamon Kelly, no one was ever convicted. With over 40 convictions, multiple gunshot wounds, countless attacks on his life, and a crime rap sheet that's longer than a 40-foot container, Martin Foley is one of the most dreaded Irish crime bosses of all time. Martin Foley, also known as the Viper, is an infamous Irish criminal who was born on the 24th of November 1952. From being a street drug dealer, the Viper advanced to becoming a close friend of Martin Cahill, also known as the General. However, the Viper has seen and done it all, from his early days of learning his trade on risky jewelry heists with the General, to his time as a significant drug importer, working with John Gilligan, with 18 bullet wounds to show for it. Foley is the true definition of what you might call a crime boss. Foley, who goes by the moniker the Viper, has been found guilty of more than 40 offences, including assault, robbery, and possession of dangerous weapons. Is there any crime in the books this guy is not guilty of? Being a notorious member of the Dublin gangland, Foley was convicted for the first time in 1968, and since that time, he's been a criminal gang member of Martin Cahill and has served time in prison for a variety of crimes, including fracturing a police officer's jaw. Reports have it that Foley attacked a Garda detective, leaving him with injuries from which he would never fully recover, according to Mick McCaffrey, the author of The Viper, The Life and Crimes of Martin Foley. He was sentenced to pay €738,449 in tax, interest, and penalties in 2020, after losing an appeal to the Supreme Court on a tax bill from the Criminal Assets Bureau. Foley had taken the matter to the Supreme Court, arguing that the CAB had put off seeking payment from him for years, and that the total amount owed dwarfed the initial verdict against him. The amount originally owed had more than tripled due to interest and penalties associated with the delinquent tax payment. As anyone would expect of a professional gangster, Foley has had numerous feuds with other gang leaders. Over the course of a career spanning more than 4 decades, he has run across the Provost frequently, making him the Rasputin of organized crime, in a manner of speaking. He is the criminal who has refused to be killed. Over these 4 decades of crime, you can count at least 5 times that Foley's life was in serious danger. In 1984, Foley was kidnapped by the IRA and hustled into a van. He was beaten before being released, following a gunfight between the Gardaí and paramilitary in Phoenix Park. He was shot in 1995 outside of Fatima Mansions, then in 1996 in an attack that was believed to be ordered by John Gilligan and executed by convicted killer Brian Meehan in 2000 while he was leaving a swimming pool in Terenure, and lastly on the 26th of January 2008. The Kinahan cartel was responsible for that last botched hit, which took place on Christy Kinahan's orders in a row over €100,000. Foley was shot 4 times as he sat in a car outside a gym in Dublin. Foley's mob pal Fat Freddie Thompson was later identified as one of the organisers. Thompson's passport was found in the house of the suspected shooter. Despite the fact that Foley and Thompson were once close buddies, Thompson had to obey orders to put out the hit on Foley. Although Foley knew who was behind the hit, he still managed to stay on the cartel's good side. Foley first gained notoriety in the 1980s as a representative of a gang at odds with the Concerned Parents anti-drug movement, and as a member of the group led by murdered gangster Martin the General Cahill. Since the late 1980s, Foley has been the target of numerous criminal organizations looking to kill him. In September 2000, when Foley was leaving the Terenure College's swimming pool, the fitness enthusiast was shot in the leg. Before then, in 1999, the Garda stopped 2 potential assassins on a motorcycle in Walkinstown and prevented an IRA hit team from killing Foley. Martin the Viper Foley is now a criminal turned debt collector. He's been accused of threatening to kill a man in an alleged incident that took place in Wexford town. He threatened to slit his throat over a €4,000 debt. Foley and his co-accused Alan Nolte both pleaded guilty to the offence. Nolte had been working Viper Debt Recovery founded by Foley when he threatened a tenant that he would slit his throat while walking his dog if he didn't come up with the payment. However, Nolte denied having any intention to carry out the threats. The landlord had told a Garda that he had called the debt recovery agency run by Foley. On November 18, 2004, Foley founded Viper Debt Recovery. At that time, the company's records identified him as a sales rep. According to the company, their goal was to engage in the provision of debt recovery and repossession services, and to carry out all activities in relation to the aforementioned business. However, on the 17th of November 2014, Foley resigned his position as a director of the business. Sonia Foley, Foley's wife, later was named as a director of the company in October of 2018. Unfortunately, the Viper, Foley's first wife, passed away from cancer. Mrs. Foley supported her husband throughout his criminal career, several incarceration terms, and 5 assassination attempts. He was reportedly inconsolable by the death of his devoted wife. She was present when Brian Meehan, a gang rival who had to serve time in prison for his involvement in the murder of Veronica Guerin, an Irish organised crime investigative journalist, opened fire with a machine pistol inside their South Dublin home in 1996. Foley was struck in the back and hand, but he was able to get away from his assailant by scurrying around the outside of the house and eventually into a garden shed. Meehan, the shooter, fled after the machine gun jammed, but Foley eventually got vengeance for his attack. The attack happened while Mrs. Foley and her teenage daughter were seated in the living room of the family house on Cashel Avenue. She claimed Martin went round the house coming in the back door. He was running for his life. When he ran through, his hand was shot badly, but it was in my house that they shot him in the back. He had a hole in his back through his jumper. You could see he was shot. There was blood everywhere. He ran through and our instinct was to get out. Martin ran upstairs and through the whole house. Naturally, each room was covered in blood. We were running for our lives too. Whoever was outside didn't want to let us pass, so we were kind of caught as well. After the assault, Mrs. Foley sought counselling and went to victim support groups. But according to acquaintances, she never fully recovered from the experience. Additionally, the Criminal Assets Bureau's claim of a €600,000 tax bill to Foley put the couple's house in jeopardy. The house was open for his wife and the kids to stay though. Later, Foley went on to marry a 26-year younger woman named Sonia Doyle at a private ceremony in the Canary Islands in 2013. Martin Foley's life is filled with one certainty. violence. His lovely wife could not escape the impact of this terrible life of violence, and in the end, she lost everything. If you like this video and want more content like this, hit that like and subscribe button. Leave us a comment on what you think about this famous crime boss. Thank you for watching.